So the film begins, the screen says Edge City, and we're taken down into the ocean where we have a couple scuba divers. One of the divers says, "Hold on a second." He begins to jimmy the lock of an old wooden box, and above the water, they're lowering a big metal beam down into the water when the line breaks and lands on the scuba diver who screams. It was funny when he screamed for some reason. Shouldn't have been. And then it cracked open the box, and we see the mask floating up, and we get our film title, The Mask, on the screen. Next, we meet Stanley Ipkiss. He's, of course, played by the great Jim Carrey. Man, JD, is there any comedian hotter than Jim Carrey in the mid 1990s?
Adam Sandler?
Yeah, I don't know. Is he on Carrey's level? I don't think he was doing $300 million at the box office. Not in the ones that we reviewed.
Okay, yeah, I mean, comparatively, I guess you're right. Like, Jim Carrey's box office numbers were slam dunks.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if there's anybody that compares to him outside of maybe Eddie Murphy on that level. I don't know. He might be in a stage all by himself there. What did you think of him in the role of Stanley Ipkiss?
To me, Jim Carrey as Stanley Ipkiss is really an excellent choice because it really pulls out the geekiness, the awkwardness, and like the juvenile tendencies that Jim Carrey has in like an organic way. So you kind of can really envision him as being this just really um, out of place bank teller that just sucks with women. Like he plays that role really well. And if this wasn't a comedy movie, maybe if it was like a drama or a romantic comedy or anything like that, I think his straight arrowed performance that he gives as just regular Stanley Ipkiss holds up.
Now we see Stanley next telling a coworker that he got her those tickets that she wanted. And then the girl says, the thing is, I've got a friend in town and she's staying at my place and I can't leave her behind and you only have 2 tickets. And he's like, go ahead, just go without me and take her. And again, he strikes out. And then his coworker Charlie comes into the scene and he tells Stanley that was one of the most pathetic strikeouts he's ever seen. His other coworker. So Charlie then tells Stanley that he wants to take him to the hottest new club in town called the Coco Bungo. And Charlie says this will be the perfect night on the town. Just when we hear some thunder in the background, we see Tina Carlisle enter the bank, played by Cameron Diaz. JD, control yourself. Any thoughts on Cameron Diaz here?
Yeah, she comes in like a freaking rainstorm. Her whole entrance is so seductive and so like really, 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 really putting her sexuality on display. As
Yeah.
we often do, I wonder, does this scene happen in this manner in 2018? I feel like the Me Too movement would have a lot to say about what she had to go through to be on the screen in this display. Like, she's essentially a piece of meat here, right? I mean, am I misinterpreting it?
No, you're not. You're not misinterpreting it. You're just an asshole. I'm sorry. No, you're not an asshole. But no, I agree with you 100%. I think it would be much different these days. However, this is 1994, and those rules do not apply to Hollywood producers and movie makers. So she is on full display here, a very short dress and a very revealing top. And she walks over to Charlie, says she wants to open a new account. She asked him to hold something for her, which he replies with, "Darling, I'll hold anything you want." She thanks him and then goes and sits down at Stanley's table. So Charlie's cut out here. Stanley fumbles with his desk for a moment, which makes Tina smile. And she's being a little flirty with Stanley here, although they haven't really said anything yet. I'm not sure what her angle is. Stanley's so distracted by her that he sharpens a pen, which cracked me up. And then we see that this is a little bit of a play from Tina, and that she's got a lipstick camera in her purse, and she's recording the bank. And then we meet our resident bad guy here in the next shot, Dorian, played by Peter Green. JD, I know you have a lot to say about Dorian here. What are your initial thoughts?
Well, first of all, let's go back to second. Jim Carrey's friend's name, Charlie, right?
Yep.
Yeah, how creepy of Charlie for sniffing her jacket. Can we just discuss that for a moment?
Very inappropriate. Yes.
Like, what in the world? I definitely didn't notice that as a kid, or maybe I thought it was just goofy or quirky or something. But holy moly, Quagmire! He just gets a big whiff of her pit juice there. Dorian is one of my favorite movie villains. Somehow he's not played by Peter Weller. Obviously, didn't think that as a kid. I wasn't like, wow, this guy looks like RoboCop. But like now, I was just like, man, did they just try to get him to look like Peter Weller, Alex Murphy, RoboCop? Like it just was blowing my mind how similar they look.
They do. That's a good pickup. So Dorian is talking with a guy named Freeze, who is giving his opinion on how hard it will be to rob this bank. Freeze wants to know what Nico thinks, who's Dorian's boss. Dorian says Nico doesn't need to know. And he grabs an 8x10 photo of Nico because why wouldn't he have one of those just laying around his desk? And he burns out his eyes with a cigarette. And Dorian says we need cash so we can take the bank. Then we take Nico. And then, my friend, this town is our playground. Stanley enters a car shop next. You didn't take the time to listen to our interesting facts. This is, in fact, the exact same set as the Ghostbusters firehouse scene here, but it's been turned into a car shop. Stanley says he's here for the Civic. The mechanic sits up and says, the brakes are shot and you need a new transmission. Stanley's like, just here for an oil change. JD, have you ever had a dealing like that where you took your car in for something really small and it turned into something really big?
Oh yeah, and you better believe I am a stickler about that. Like I turn into an 80-year-old man when they start to try to upsell me on services. Not happening. Nope.
Yeah, I had just recently, last summer, took my SUV in and it came back that my tires, and this is probably my own fault, but my tires had so little tread on them that they couldn't even legally allow me to leave the car shop with those tires on. I'd asked for them to be rotated. Apparently, they were on their last leg. And then I had something wrong with the engine. So what I thought was a $34.99 oil change turned into about $2,500 worth of work, which I refused and told them to pull my car out before I lose my mind. And then I took it to another shop and got it done for about $800. But I did legitimately need those things done. Stanley's given a loaner car here, and he pulls up to the Coco Bungo Club. And the best way to describe this car is it's like a more compact version of the car that Buck Russell drives in Uncle Buck, which shameless plug is in our archives right now for you to listen to. And the car is smoking, it's doing the backfire. Everyone is staring at him as he gets out. And Charlie gets introduced by Stanley to a couple of girls. He tells them that Stanley's huge in the banking world. Charlie calls over to one of Dorian's guards who are watching the door with him, and they let Charlie and the girls in. But Stanley gets cut off at the pass, and when he crosses the rope to join the rest of the group, they literally throw him into the street. When he gets up, he gets splashed by a passing car, so his clothes are all dirty. And then Tina pulls up, looking amazing. And Stanley tries to play off the fact that the car that's just pulled up behind him is not his. And Tina again seems very amused by Stanley. JD, thoughts on this scene?
Yeah, I'm glad that Cameron Diaz wore her best Beetlejuice outfit in the scene.
Yes.
That'd be a future episode, right?
Oh, that has to. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another movie that just doesn't really fit into modern generations.
If it can beat out Multiplicity on full top.
Oof, that'll be a tough one. If either of them can beat out Mr. Mom. It's great to see the banter and the back and forth between Tina and Stanley, because she really does seem to have like a subdued, genuine interest in him, which I know we get like little hints and subtext coming out through the movie about her character and his character, then in the role of relationships in the city that they're in. It's kind of a nice little, neat little play that comes to fruition later.
Yep. And Stanley's car breaks down on the way home on the bridge, and he gets out and he kicks the front bumper, and the car literally falls apart. And Stanley's now walking over to the edge of the bridge. and we hear the thunder start back up. He looks down in the water and sees something that looks like a person. So he runs down the bridge yelling he knows CPR. He gets into the water, and what he thought was a person was just some garbage. However, he does find the mask, and as he kind of holds it up towards his face, it gives like a little green glow. And right before he puts it on, the police shine a light down on him and say, "Hey, what's going on down there?" And he goes, I was just looking for my mask. Found it. So we see Stanley walking into his apartment next. He's a mess. He's tracking mud all over the place and water. The landlord comes out and yells at him and says this is coming out of his deposit. I can't help but notice the similarities here between Ace Ventura and the Mask with the whole landlord. JD, did you pick up on that at all?
I did. And it's really just it brought me back into that scene, and I wonder what the similarities were in the writing room between the two, because it's a great bit of little comedy that Carrie pulls off wonderfully. This old bag is she's a bale of carrots.
Hey, I'm gonna test your mind for a second here. I know in Dumb and Dumber he also lives in an apartment. In The Cable Guy, he lives in an apartment. At what point does Carrie get out of an apartment and actually live in a house in his movie career?
Liar, liar.
Is it Liar Liar?
What else would it be?
I thought he lived in a high-rise apartment in that too. You might be right. You might be wrong. I know that the kid does. The kid,
okay,
the ex-wife.
I'm picturing the scene in Liar Liar when he rolls up to the house and does the claw.
Yeah.
So I think I'm confusing his living situation in that movie. Good call by you.
We might be. It might get all the way to the one that almost won the poll topic. The one where he lives in the make believe world. I can't think of the name. Truman Show.
The number 23. That's what you're thinking of.
I definitely wasn't thinking number 23, but I like the name drop. Okay, anyway, back to the review here. So Stanley is watching cartoons, which plays a big role in this storyline here. And Miss Peenman knocks and yells to turn down the cartoons. Stanley changes the channel, and I never remember this guy, but I can't remember his name, but I know he's the Clear Eyes and the
Ben Stein.
Bueller? Yeah, Ben Stein.
And from Win Ben Stein's Money on Comedy Central. Remember that TV show?
Yeah. He made a good living on very few words. Clear Eyes and Bueller. 3 words, a lot of money.
Well, I was very confused, after knowing who he was because of Ferris Bueller and then from the Clear Eyes commercials. And then when Win Ben Stein's Money came on, I was like, oh, who is this guy? He just is some ridiculously rich guy that just gets to be like, okay, I'll be in this commercial now. I really thought that it was like his money from his private vault that he was giving away.
But anyway, the Clear Eyes guy is talking about how everyone wears a mask, metaphorically speaking. So Stanley walks over to the mirror and he's kind of mocking what he just said on TV, and he puts on the mask and he starts screaming and he's spinning all over the apartment like the Tasmanian Devil, which I'm sure is what they were going for, cartoonish. When he stops spinning, he says, "Smoking! It's party time, P-A-R-T-Y. Why? Because I gotta!" He goes into the hallway. Next, an alarm clock falls out of his pocket, and he pulls out a giant hammer, mallet, whatever you want to call it, and he tries to bust it. Miss Peenman comes out, screams, and then tries to shoot him with a shotgun, which sends him bouncing out of the apartment and landing face first in the street. He has to pick himself up after he's flattened himself. JD, thoughts on the scene here in our first look at the mask?
So first of all, you're right to reference the Tasmanian Devil, and if you recall, there is a pillow on his couch of Taz.
Yes. Good call.
So that's very intentional. Yeah, we get to see the mask hair, and holy moly, that whole scene is frightening. Like, even watching this as an adult, seeing this whole process go, I did not like this. This scared the bananas out of me. And then he gets out into the hallway, and, his landlord opens the door to find this masked hooligan, and her response is, I'm going to blow this asshole up with a shotgun. And he jumps out the window and goes kersplat. What the fuck is going on in this movie? Things escalate really quickly.
Stanley is walking down the street. A guy stops him and asks him for the time. So he pulls out a clock and says, "Oh, look, it's exactly 2 seconds before I honk your nose and pull your underwear over your head." The alarm goes off, and he does just that. And then he runs away. The thugs give chase. The mask has turned he's turned the alley into a bit of a circus here. And let's listen to a clip next of the mask.
Get right up here! Don't be shy! Nobody likes a bashful letterhead! Move it! For my first trick, I'd like to do something for you, son. We have a giraffe! There you go, son. Now get out of here. You're bothering me.
Thanks. Wow.
Now. Sorry, wrong pocket. For you, son! A little potty English. A French poodle. Sorry, son, the dog was rabid, had to put it down. And last but not least, my favorite. A Tommy gun!
This is incredible. With these powers, I could be a superhero!
JD, what do you think of this scene here?
I love this scene. Like, this scene always stuck out to me as a kid. I don't remember him face planting in the prior scene from when I was a child, but seeing him being the little carnival barker, doing the balloon animals, and then viciously turning it into trying to murder them. Like, let's call this for what it is. Like, he's trying to murder this group of people. That's straight vigilante style, perhaps, but that's going to land you in the slammer, and he's going to get the raw dog pokey for many a night.
Hey, JD, what's the better Tommy gun movie, The Mask or Home Alone?
In terms of overall presentation of said Tommy gun or the movie itself?
Just the presentation of it.
I gotta say Home Alone.
I'm going to give you to the count of 10 before I pump your guts full of lead. 1, 2, 10. I love it. Can't wait till we get into December. Now, after he shoots up all these guys and they scatter, he says, "With these powers, I could become a superhero." But first, he jets over to the car shop, the doors bust open, and he yells, "Hold on to your nuts, it's time for an overhaul." And he starts spinning Tasmanian style throughout the shop, and the scene fades away here. JD, what do you think he means by "hold on to your nuts, it's time for an overhaul"?
I had a pretty good estimation to what I thought might happen in this scene. Again, I don't remember this scene from being a kid, you know? And so I was kind of like, oh, I was like, what's he doing here? What's he going for? I'm trying to think of the scene in terms of where it lands in the story and the pacing of the overall narrative. And it's kind of like out of place, like for him to want to get this exact amount of revenge over a petty auto repair. And I know we later find out what he actually does to them is horrible. I hope that's in your notes. We're going to discuss what he does, right? Okay, good. Yeah, I do not want our listeners to miss the details of what that's like a reverse rusty trombone he gives them. Ugh.
So Stanley wakes up without the mask on the next morning. He finds the mask sitting on his nightstand. He looks in the mirror and says, this was a dream. God, I gotta lay off the cartoons. He hears a knock at the door, and we meet Lieutenant Calloway. And he says, "Someone attacked Miss Keenman yesterday, and she fired two rounds of a shotgun 5 feet from your door." Stanley pokes his head out and sees Miss Keenman explaining that the guy had jumped out the window. Stanley looks at the time and realizes he's late, so he cuts the conversation short here. But I thought this was interesting. I know we talked about this, I think, before we even got on air. Maybe you brought this up in the interesting facts. I can't remember. But what he's doing as the mask is affecting real life. JD, what are your comments there?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that, when we watch these movies as a kid, we don't necessarily think about how they affect other people around you. We just think they're cute and cheeky and ha ha ha. But let me try that again. His animated antics have real world um, damages. Like, it's not just fun and games, and like maybe he could bounce around like this and that, and he can dodge bullets and spin in a circle, but the people around him face real pain and consequences. And the one thing that I find so interesting about this scene is he wakes up in bed and he looks very well rested.
Yeah, good
Like
point.
that like caught my attention like instantly. Like he looks like he had an amazing night's sleep. I haven't had one of those in years. Is that the secret to just be causing havoc all night and not getting any sleep? Like, I
Well,
almost think that there's a parallel to be like, yeah, the mask is a metaphor for cocaine or something.
if you remember the movie Little Monsters, it has the reverse effect. When he goes down into underneath the bed, he wakes up really tired and has to wear the sunglasses. So, yeah, that's an interesting take. Let's get back to Stanley here. So he realizes that he's now late for work and he gets dressed quickly, heads out the door. But before he leaves, he grabs the mask and throws it out the window. And then as he shuts the door, it boomerangs right back into the apartment, back onto the chair. So we're at the car shop next. An employee is being stretchered out. He's on all fours, so face down, ass up, and we've got a muffler hanging out of his ass. The reporter asks Lieutenant Calloway what happened, and he doesn't give her anything here. Uh, so, JD, I think we have the answer to what the overhaul was.
Yeah. Seriously, think of the practicalness of this. Like that's my takeaway from this movie that I challenge you guys if you have yet to watch it. Put on the lenses of thinking of the mask with how it applies to the real world because Stanley Ipkiss, as a man that puts on a mask that he finds in a river, broke into an auto body shop and forcefully rear-ended two mechanics with tailpipes. He shoved those up their asses. Yeah, but I mean, like, then those guys had to go to the hospital. They had to have a surgeon remove them. They're not going to work for months. The embarrassment. Like, remember that episode of Everybody Loves Raymond where Robert gets gored by the bull? Like
No.
that.
Yeah. I was thinking about what's that Christmas movie with Bob Thornton where he's like, "You're not going to shit right for a week." Bad Santa. And yeah, these guys, I don't think he'll shit right for a year.
I'm sorry, did you call him Bob Thornton?
Well, it's Billy Bob Thornton. I can't shorten his name. We're not
No,
on that
I
level.
loved it. No, I loved it. I love it. It's kind of like how we're talking about Jonathan Knoxville. I'm good with just Bob Thornton.
Next, Stanley is getting yelled at by Mr. Dickey for being 40 minutes late. Charlie helps out by saying he was helping a prospective client, and they show Dickey the newspaper with Tina on the cover. He says, "Be sure next time she comes in to bring her to my office." Charlie tells Stanley that women are always looking for the BBD. Man, when he said that, my light bulb went off and I was like, ooh, this is about to get dirty. Apparently, all it means is bigger, better deal. Did you expect something different?
Bigger, badder, beak daddy.
Bigger, better dilly stick? I don't know. I thought it was going somewhere else with it. But apparently, just bigger, better deal. So Stanley thinks Tina is different. Charlie tells him to forget it. You need someone more down to earth. Someone redheaded with pouty lips and a green jacket and a name tag on. And we see the reporter from earlier who is asking Calloway some questions. And she enters and we meet Peggy Brandt. And she asks for Stanley Ipkiss as Charlie goes to her right away. So he's now 0 for 2 on the women. And he points her toward Stanley's direction. And she says she's from the Tribune, which Ipkiss replies, "Yeah, sorry, I canceled because someone kept stealing my newspapers. No, I'm not here for that." And she wants to know if he's a client of Ripley Auto Finish. She says, "You are a client of theirs, right?" He says, no, I don't own a car." She says, "You don't own an '89 Civic?" Oh, yeah, that. Yeah, oh, it's all coming back to me now. Stanley says, wait, Peggy Brandt of Dear Peggy? You printed one of my letters last year, remember? Nice Guys finished last. He says, you're Mr. Nice Guy? You know how many letters we got from that last year? He says the whole Dear Peggy gig didn't pay a lot, so now she's after the truth. She gives him her personal card and says to call anytime. And then before she leaves, he asks, is there really hundreds of women out there looking for a guy like me? She smiles and says, yeah, I'm one of them. She blushes and leaves the scene here. You talked about this a minute ago. What the fuck is going on here? She comes in to like crack the case and it turns into, you're Peggy? Like, I'm so lost now.
Yeah, there's so much of this movie in terms of storytelling and pacing and what they're trying to give that doesn't add up. And now we're building a new subplot out of nowhere with Peggy from Peggy's Pendulum. What was the name of her column? I already forget.
Peggy Brandt of Dear Peggy.
I like Peggy's Pendulum better.
I like Peggy's Bonbons.
Are you suggesting that as a name for her column, or are you specifically referring to her bazungas?
I like where you're going with the bazungas. Yes, to both. Because why not? I mean, the story doesn't make sense. Either does this comment. Yeah, it's just confusing. He never gives her an answer on the whole car thing, other than just saying, oh yeah, it's coming back to me. And then she says she's out for the truth, but then gets so caught up on it, on this Mr. Nice Guy, that she's just like blushing her and batting her eyes at him, and she's just like, call me. Okay. I don't know.
Yeah, she's an awful investigative journalist.
Yeah,
Let that be said, because she
should have stayed with the Dear Peggy column. Yeah.
But she's not even like how she goes and she's just showing up to report to a crime scene, which is out of her journalistic jurisdiction, anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And then she sneaks into the building and she finds out that Ipkiss's car was there, and so then she's like, I better question him. He might know why these freaking mechanics got keistered. Like, come on.
Don't say keistered.
I love that term. When I learned what that term meant, I used it for everything. That was 8th grade was a great time.
So Stanley is dreaming next of putting the moves on Tina, just moments after liking this redhead. Oh, nope, I'm a second ahead of myself. Dorian enters next. Nico is in his office playing virtual golf. Pretty cool for the 90s. Nico thanks him for coming, and Dorian says, well, next time, just call. Leave the pizza delivery boys at home. They wrestle him down to the ground, and they put a golf tee in his mouth, which he spits out, and then they put a second one in there, and a golf ball. And let's listen to a clip here of Nico laying down the law to Dorian.
The cops tried to shut the club down this morning. They say you've been using the place to run your own small-time scams. I get things like that, I start losing my concentration. My game, it goes straight to hell. You could too.
205 yards.
I'm fed up with you, Dorian. But I'm going to cut you a break. 1 week to get out of town. After that, I'll use your empty little skull to break in my new 9-iron.
JD, thoughts on this scene?
This scene is very troubling. You know, we get, I know The Mask is a dark movie at its core and it comes from dark subject matter, but there's only a few glimpses of like the criminal underbelly that is operating below the main storyline. And the way that Nico just abuses Dorian here, it just seems like it's better placed in a much different movie. So it plays to great effect because it's really entertaining and it really sets the stakes of who Dorian is, but he's still not half as powerful as the big bad who is Nico. It's like Kylo Ren reporting to Supreme Leader Snoke.
Nice, man. I like it. Stanley is dreaming next of putting the moves on Tina. She starts licking his ear, and he finally comes to, and his dog is licking his ear, not Tina. He sits up out of bed and then discovers the mask is still in the house after he thought he'd thrown it out the window. So he kind of tosses it on the ground behind the couch, and then he thinks for about a half second and then dives on the ground and puts the mask back on. And then he looks at a phone at Tina. He looks at a photo of Tina that he had put on his mirror and says, "Hold on, Sugar Daddy's got a sweet tooth tonight." And the mask checks his pocket for money. There's nothing in there, so he says, "You can't make a scene if you don't have the green. I better make a quick stop." So meanwhile, Freeze is about to break into the bank, and they get to the door, and then the mask tornadoes out of the front door of the bank. He apologizes and leaves, leaving Freeze to deal with the cops. At the club, he makes a grand entrance. The guy at the door asks if he's on the list. He says, "No, but I believe my friends are. Franklin, Grant, and Jackson, you may know them." He holds up the money and then kind of throws it in the air and enters the club where we see Tina performing and kind of working her way into the crowd. He grabs a seat in the back, and he's just very cartoonish here. His jaw drops down at one minute. His eyes are popping out. Dorian gets approached by one of the goons that says, "We have trouble. You got to come upstairs." And then in the next scene here, we're going to see the mask take the stage. He says, "Let's rock this joint." And the band starts playing a very up-tempo number, and he starts dancing with Tina. And pretty cool. Props to Cameron Diaz and Jim Carrey, who did do their own dancing in the movie here. And Jim Carrey for doing his own singing. But JD, what do you think of these couple scenes, kind of fast-hitting here?
Yeah, we get a lot of really big strokes. How that sounds so bad. We get a lot of broad strokes of the story that sort of fall into place here, and we get to see the direction of where everything's going. We get a lot of more physical, wacky comedy out of Jim Carrey, and then, for as best as I can guess, Jim Carrey and Cameron Diaz kick off the whole zoot suit phenomenon that ruled the mid to late 90s with the whole swing revolution.
Yeah.
I mean, is there a Cherry Poppin' Daddy zoot suit riot without this scene?
Probably not. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, you might be correct. So upstairs, as they're performing, Freeze tells Dorian that someone hit the bank before we got to it. And Freeze dies just a second later. Dorian asks who did this, and the guy's like, I don't know. And he looks down at the stage, and he goes, "Him, right there." Dorian says, "The guy dancing with Tina, he's dead." So Dorian makes his way down to Tina, but not before the mask plants a kiss on her. They shoot his tie, which falls to the ground, and we see it turn from whatever color tie it was to the pajamas that Stanley was wearing before he put the mask on. The same one that Kellaway commented on when he knocked on the door earlier asking questions. We get a clip next of Dorian asking for his money before they start shooting at the mask.
Okay, Twinkle Toes. I want to know where my money is, and I want to know right now.
Okay.
You've got 17.5% in T-bills amortized over the fiscal year. 8% in stocks and bonds. Carry the 9 to buy by the gross national product. Fortunately, funeral bouquets are deductible.
Ice this deadbeat!
All right, JD, what did you think of that scene?
Dorian's really just kind of a badass, isn't he? Like,
yeah.
we see him showing off. He has a showdown with the mask. He wants his money, and he has no regard for the mask's life. He's just going to shoot him. Just, okay, well, he doesn't have my money, just kill him. Like, he's a pretty primetime player.
Kellaway enters next and tells Dorian to drop it. Dorian asked if he has a warrant this time, and Kellaway says they caught a guy in a green mask leaving the bank, and I have what is called probable cause. Dorian says, "For once, you're right, except for it wasn't one of my boys." maybe if you tried some actual police work. Calloway kind of cuts him off, tells him to call that high price lawyer of yours, and they take him out in cuffs. And then Calloway goes over and finds a piece of pajamas laying on the ground, or as they call it in this movie, pajamas, and says, Ipkiss. JD, first off, what's the correct way to say pajamas? Is it pajamas or pajamas?
It's pronounced PJs.
Okay. You shorten it. I like that. No confusion. Also, what did you think of the detective work here by Calloway finding the small piece of his PJs?
Yeah, I mean, good on him for having an open eye on that. I think it's interesting to note the sort of physics about the whole mask's persona, where he puts on the mask and it changes his personality, but it also changes his clothing. So I just find it interesting that when that piece of clothing is shot off of him, it turns back into Stanley Ipkiss's normal clothing.
Yeah.
Like I want to know the whole science behind that whole piece of astrophysics that's going on there.
Yeah, I don't think they thought that far. They just didn't want a horror movie. They just crammed all this in. We'll see. Calloway is knocking on the door next morning, and we see Stanley laying in bed. The mask is on the pillow next to him. He goes over to a closet door and opens it up, and all the bank money comes flowing out onto the door, or flowing out toward the door there where Calloway's knocking. We see Milo pawing at the door next with a mountain of money inside. Stanley's trying to get him to stop as Calloway has come inside and is kind of looking around and grilling him about the PJs that he found. And so there's no way that somebody else had these same PJs, because they're ridiculous. And he found him at the Coca Bungo. This scene really doesn't do much because he doesn't admit to anything, and Calloway really doesn't press him too hard about the PJs. He kind of just lets it go. What do you think of this scene?
Yeah, I mean, he's got a good link between the piece of fabric and Ipkiss, So I think he's doing his due diligence as an officer of the law, and checking up on it. But it always bothers me, like, how nervous Ipkiss gets and like the lies that he comes up with, that his pajamas got stolen. It's like, that's the best you can come up with.
So next we see Calloway is telling another lieutenant to run the prints on Stanley Ipkiss. We smash over to Dorian, who's offering up $50,000 in cash to anyone that finds the masked guy before the cops do. Dorian tells Tina that it didn't look like she put up much of a fight with that freak last night when he tried to kiss her. She doesn't really have much of a rebuttal there. We go back into the bank. Stanley enters. Mr. Dickey is yelling at him for being an hour late, and they're having a major crisis because they got robbed. Stanley finally snaps and stands up for himself and tells him to shut his trap before he calls his father and tells him that his son is running this place like his own personal piggy bank. Dickey just stares at him and really doesn't know what to say. And then Charlie tells him, that was genius, man. He wants to know what side of the bed he woke up on, or whose side of the bed. Charlie gives him 2 more tickets to the Coco Bongo Club. When we see Tina come in, what do you think of this scene here with Tina and kind of revealing that she's into this green guy?
I don't know. This part of the movie, this little subtext and plot really made me uncomfortable even as a kid.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, how would you react to seeing the mask in the flesh? Because it doesn't, I know he's wearing a mask, but it's not like he's wearing a mask. Like, he looks like he has cancer or some sort of protrusion or something's going on there to make it look really weird. And the fact that she would have any sexual energy with that, just, I don't know. I never liked it.
I mean, the ladies were into Teen Wolf. He was pretty hairy.
Yeah, that always bothered me too.
Yeah, strange. I can't tell at this point because I hadn't watched this movie in 20 years. Like, is Tina really interested in the mask, or is she just trying to get the money now? And she knows something about Stanley that we don't know. I mean, I literally at this point had no idea how this movie was going to end. I was not remembering any of it.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, though, because we know that she is involved with Dorian and his criminal, dealings. She was casing the joint for him.
Right. Yeah, who knows? Stanley is talking with the Clear Eyes guy next. Still don't have a name on him. He tells Stanley his book was meant to be metaphorical, and he's not buying Stanley's story. So Stanley tells him he's going to just show him. He's going to put the mask on, and you're responsible for what happens next. He's like, okay, go for it. And it's just a shot of Stanley just jumping around in circles and screaming, and the mask is not working. Eventually, he tells him he should get some help professionally, and it's not his field. And then he gives him some advice because Stanley says he has to meet Tina tonight, and he tells him to be both himself and the mask. What do you think of this scene? This is just goofy.
For me, you mentioned that the scene prior with the detective in his apartment didn't do much for you. This scene doesn't do much for me in terms of the story. It seems out of place. It seems like a typical 90s kind of a movie where they're in this high-rise office building. It's a really neat set piece where we have this brilliant professor of masks or something explaining intricacies of the story. It's like we can do without that. I think it's funny to see Jim Carrey put on the mask and sort of get really rubbery. And I mean, there is something to be said for the allegory that gets built between who Stanley Ipkiss is, who the mask is, and what he represents both in his own social life and his own romantic life. But other than that, I think we can cut this scene from the movie.
Later that night, Stanley arrives at the meeting spot with Tina. We see Calloway and his partner watching from the bushes. Tina arrives first. Stanley says he's just there to make sure everything goes well, and she meets up with the mask. Stanley says he has to leave. His friend should be here any second. She tries to stop him, but he goes behind a bush. We hear a thunder strike, and out comes the mask. He's being a little aggressive here, and it seemed to kind of almost put her off a little bit. Just how strong he was coming on to her. And eventually, Calloway pops out of the bush and tells him to freeze, which he literally jumps in the air and freezes. It was like, you told me to freeze. And then the ice breaks. He falls to the ground. He does some goofy impressions. And then Calloway books him, puts the handcuffs on him. What do you think of this scene here?
Yeah, I don't... So there's so much of this movie that's clunky at times. And I don't want to get into how I feel like I probably overanalyzed The Rock, their character development in last week's episode. And I don't want to go down that route again. But, she was interested in the mask, and she was interested because of his Lothario type presence. And he's putting it on strong here, and now she doesn't like it. So it kind of suggests that maybe she is falling for Ipkiss a little bit. That there's that second layer to it. But then it always bothers me how easily he gets handcuffed.
Yeah.
And I know that there's more to the scene that, we're going to get into. But, you're a character that's capable of doing anything and manipulating the reality around you to be whatever you want it to be. It's just kind of like very, I don't know, expected.
Yeah.
Like you feel like that was what happens next is the necessary steps that the story has to go through. Like I don't feel like they're being adventurous at all.
Good points. We cut to a quick scene with Peggy doing some detective work, and then it cuts right back to the mask, and he's being searched. They're checking his pockets, and they keep pulling out just tons of stuff out of his pockets there. It's very goofy the way that it's done. He finally escapes. He gets outside the park, and he's greeted by the entire police force after he bolts up the door. So he does what any rational man would do that's caught by the police. He breaks into song and gives a performance. I'm actually going to play a little clip here of his singing, because again, this is Jim Carrey. And then to avoid getting captured by the police, he just basically gets them all singing and dancing, and then kind of slips out through the alleyway. Calloway gives chase. Stanley takes off the mask, and then Peggy pulls up. He yells for him to get into the car, and he runs and gets into the car as they're shooting at him, and they drive away. I'm very confused at how Peggy got to that location and knew what was going on, because we just saw her some like detective office, but there's a lot of holes here. We don't have to harp on it, but JD, what'd you think of the song and dance?
Another scene that I personally could have done without. Again, the point that I want to have us address is what is the impact that the mask has on the reality of those around him? Like, why are they entranced by him? Like, only the one detective like doesn't give in to his shenanigans. What special power does he have? Like, Doyle starts dancing, and then Calloway is like, knock it off. But it's just like I can't wrap my mind around it. And I know it's a great set piece and it's visually entertaining and it's funny and there's a lot of good gags in it. And then he pulls off the mask for whatever reason. Hey, here's the one thing that can save me from all of my troubles. Let me take off my mask. And then the reporter shows up. So again, it's just like these really just like Lego blocks of story that are just being pieced together and just sort of like, this has to happen so we can see comedy here. And like you said, there's a lot that we can harp on, but let's not.
So Peggy tells him that she saw everything. He says he's losing control. When he puts the mask on, he can be anything, do anything. Peggy tells Stanley that he's all he needs to be. He just needs to be the man he was in the letter that he wrote. And that's all he'll ever need to be. And he's like, oh, do you really mean it? She's, no, actually, no, I don't. The doors kick open, Dorian enters, and Peggy's double-crossed Stanley here. I didn't see it coming, but never trust a redhead. JD, what'd you think?
Yeah, I'm with you again. I mean, you're taking a character who we've seen for a total of like 18 seconds of screen time, and you're bringing her back, so you don't know what to expect. You've got no point of reference to what she's up to, and then we find out. So yeah, I mean, it definitely caught me by surprise that she kind of backstabbed him a little bit there.
Yeah, she's definitely out of her element, as Walter would say. Shameless plug, Archives, Big Lebowski.
I think this episode has been our biggest shameless plug episode yet.
It might be. They seem to be getting more and more. But for real, Archives, people, check them out. So anyway, Dorian, she goes over to Dorian and she gives him the quick lowdown. She's like, he puts on the mask, it turns him into the green thing and makes him do whatever he wants. And she gives him the mask, and she gets the money as promised. And then basically when they start dragging him away, she turns and says, hey, I told me you weren't going to hurt him. Dorian's like, I lied. They have Stanley hanging upside down. Dorian yells up and wants to know how this works. He's just put it on. So Dorian puts on the mask, the lightning strikes, the smoke surrounds him. We never had smoke with Stanley, so that was an interesting twist. And then his mask looks a lot different. He's more Incredible Hulk looking. He's jacked up. He's kind of scary looking. His goons want to know what to do with Ipkiss, and he just says, well, the police are looking for the mask, so we'll give them the mask. So outside of the apartment, they actually, I'll pause there for a second. What'd you think of the scene here with Dorian grabbing the mask and his portrayal of what he looks like with it?
Okay, so I know I've spent my last few responses really sort of like derailing this movie, but I think now we sort of start to get things. I love this scene. This is what I'm trying to say. Let me start over. I love this scene because it's the story taking what I think is an interesting and bold step. We're taking the mask, the character that we've known and established, and we're putting it on someone else. So we're taking everything that's been established and we're giving it a new point of view in Dorian. And of course, like you mentioned, his whole turning into the mask is a different experience. And, that goes into what we've learned earlier about masks bringing out, our inner desires and feelings and whatever. And, Dorian is a completely different beast than Stanley Ipkiss was. And I think that's kind of a unique little twist that they've added in here. And Dorian is scary as a human, but as a mask, ugh.
Yeah, and you make a lot of good points there. And I just think it's necessary from the writing standpoint to give Stanley's character something that he's going to have to overcome. Now he doesn't have the mask. He doesn't have that power. He's hanging upside down. Who knows what's going to happen to him? We'll find out here in a minute. But before that, I mean, there was really no conflict. I mean, he just kind of did and got away with whatever he wanted to. I think you have to write that in there, right?
Yeah, it does. I mean, Dorian's been a villain, but not directly up until this point. And now the stakes are definitely finally established, whereas we have Dorian as the Mask, who's now capable of doing whatever he wants, and that includes killing Stanley Ipkiss.
So outside of his apartment, Stanley's apartment, the head gang member says, "The money better be in there, Ipkiss, or you can Ipkiss yourself goodbye." That was a terrible line. God, I didn't even laugh. I just wrote, "Ooh, brutal." They break down the door to his apartment. They go into the closet. All the money's there like he told them it would be. Milo, the dog, sees everything that's going on. He sees Stanley out in the car, so he kind of sneaks out the door and then follows the car. And we pull up to the precinct, and Calloway's outside, and he's like, "Well, it's not like Ipkiss is just going to fall into my lap." And he turns, and Ipkiss falls into his lap and gets thrown from the car. What you think of this scene?
Yeah, it's a little funny payoff there, Like
Yeah.
Calloway, I think, is a great character overall, and it's good comedic timing. Yeah.
So Stanley's in his jail cell, and we hear Milo barking outside. Stanley tells Milo he better go find a new home. He's going to be in here for a long time. The next day, Tina enters to visit him. She wants to know if it's true. He says it is, but don't tell anybody because I might be able to strike up a deal and get out of here in about 10,000 years. Tina tells him that Dorian is going to be at the ball tonight and something bad is going to happen. She thanks Stanley for treating her like a person and not some piece of meat, and says that night at the club she met someone very special. Stanley's like, "Yeah, the mask." Nope, it was the man under the mask. They're about to kiss, and then the cop comes in and breaks it up. This is a good moment. This is the first time when I'm like, oh, he actually has a shot at Tina.
Yeah, I know. There's some good growth between their characters, and from the first moment that they saw one another, and she was very sympathetic to who he was. So it's another good payoff to some storylines that have been built in earlier.
So Tina's being chased outside by Dorian's goons. Stanley tries to get the guard to help out, but he's sleeping at the desk, and he only wakes up to tell Ipkiss to keep it quiet. Stanley calls down to Milo. He gets him to jump into the jail cell. Or he's trying to get him to. Dorian has Tina cornered in the alley. He tells his boys to pick her out something pretty to wear because she's going to the party tonight. We get back into the jail cell. Milo has finally jumped up, made his way in. Stanley tells Milo to go get the keys from the cop. And this part made me laugh. I don't know, maybe because I'm a dog owner, I'm a sucker for it. But he goes over to get the keys, but he grabs a piece of cheese. He's like, no, not the cheese, the keys. So he puts down the cheese and then bites down on the keys and kind of pulls them off the cop. So because of that, Stanley's able to free himself. He then pistol whips the guard after he steals his gun. And then he runs into Calloway and puts a gun on him as well. Calloway tells him, "You're in a police station. You're surrounded by cops. You're never walking out of here." And he's like, "You're right. You got to take me out." Puts the handcuffs on him. And Calloway leads him out of the precinct. JD, is it me or is everything Calloway suggesting just automatically happens? Is that a theme throughout or just the last couple scenes?
I don't know. He goes in waves, especially depending on who he's dealing with and what he says. It is, I want to say it's a little bit inconsistent, but a lot of the action and the dialogue and exposition of the story just really fits into exactly what needs to happen and when, usually to lead up to different jokes and gags.
Yeah. From your point of view, is that lazy writing or just we don't have a better idea?
I want to say it's probably more so to take advantage of what people are coming to see. Like you got to set them up and knock them down.
In the limo, we see Dorian put the mask on. We're at the club next. It's gambling night. We've got Nico, Dorian's boss, at the party. The doors burst open. Dorian, or Shrek, makes his way in. We smash the Calloway and Ipkiss, who are driving to the ball. We're back in the party. Dorian's guns are back in the party, Dorian's guys are gunning down Nico's men. Nico fires about 4 or 5 shots into Dorian's chest, and he just kind of sucks him in. He's got him in his mouth, and he just spits him back at Nico, and they fire like a shotgun. So Nico's now dead. Outside, Calloway and Ipkiss arrive. Stanley gives Calloway the radio to call for help. And then Stanley tells Milo to stay here. Things could get dangerous. He leaves to go inside. What did you think of these two pretty quick scenes here?
Yeah, I'm glad that we get to see Dorian really sort of fit into his, I love that you called him Shrek personality, because, I mean, there's a reason why I think he's a pretty solid villain overall, especially from 90s movies, and him sucking in those bullets and then just blasting Nico is just, I don't think Dorian has a soul.
Yeah, I don't know that he's really Shrek. He's really more Lou Ferrigno, isn't he? The way he looks.
Okay, yeah, I'll buy that for $1.
Inside, Dorian blows up the giant piggy bank, and they're tying Tina up to a tree and surrounding her with explosives. Stanley calls over to Charlie, and he's underneath a table hiding, gives him a gun, and tells him to start sneaking people out. Dorian says, "This party's over in 10 minutes." And he arms the explosives to go off. Stanley has a gun to his head next, and he's captured by one of the goons with the ponytail. Tina tells Dorian she just wants one last kiss, but she wants a kiss from the real Dorian, not the mask. Dorian's like, "There's only always time for one more kiss."
His voice isn't, it's
so
just
weird.
so, yeah, because Jim Carrey's voice doesn't really change underneath the mask. It gets more animated, but Dorian is just like satanic.
And then he takes it off and he's like, "Hey, baby." It's like Mr. Smooth voice. I'm like, oh, that's a big change there.
Well,
So,
he
anyway.
he unsheathed his beak.
So he pulls off the mask, and Tina is loosening her foot. She kicks the mask out of his hand, sending it flying through the air. And if you've ever seen Air Bud, you know what's next. All the guys are missing, and they're trying to grab it. And here comes Milo through the air, snatches it, and Stanley yells, "Run, Milo!" He goes to get Tina out of her ties, but Dorian punches him. Milo has been caught by one of the goons that's grabbed a hold of his leg, so he drops the mask out of his mouth and puts it on his head, does a little Tasmanian devil spin. We cut back to Dorian, who's on top of Stanley punching him, and he says he's going to really enjoy picking him apart. And Stanley says, "I hope you enjoy it with one freaking eye." Pokes him in the eyeball. That cracked me up. It's such a Ric Flair move. Did you like the eye poke?
Nah, I like the eye poke. It's one of those ones that, like, I kind of hope that one day I get, like, jumped in a dark alley, but I get the upper hand, and I get to be like, "Yeah, I hope you enjoy my wallet with one eye," and then I poke him in the eye and I run away.
Yeah, so the eye poke frees him up, so Stanley charges and tackles him. Milo is now a very vicious-looking dog, and he's got some giant teeth here. We cut back. Stanley's punching Dorian just left, right. Eventually, he pauses and takes a breath. He's like, "I'm winning." So after he pauses and says, "I'm winning," Dorian clocks him, but Stanley winds up and knocks Dorian out, and he goes flying backward, hits his head on a slot machine, and pretty much knocks himself out. Milo comes to Stanley. Stanley pulls off the mask, and then it gets shot out of his hand behind one of the wet bars. So he runs after it, dives over the bar, and puts it on. And then he emerges and says, "Hey, did you miss me?" He drinks some orange juice, and it comes out of about 10 different holes. He's like, "Maybe you didn't." The mask does a pretty good Clint Eastwood impression next. He says, "Do you punks feel lucky? Well, do you?" And he pulls out 2 giant handfuls of guns. They all run away. And then when he pulls the trigger, it's one of the fake, like, bang flags come out of all of them. Very cartoonish. So they all run away. Tina yells for him. He goes over, grabs the bomb, and eats it. It blows up in his stomach. He burps and spits some fire out and says that was one spicy meatball. Dorian is back to his feet. He's got a knife now. He tries to get to Tina in the mask, but the mask draws a toilet flush handle on a tree. and then it turns into real life, and he pulls it when Dorian gets into the water. Sucks him down like a toilet. The mask says, "You were good, kid, but as long as I'm around, you'll always be second best." Stanley pulls off the mask. The police come into the club. JD, what do you think about the death of Dorian and these fight scenes here?
I'm so happy to see Jim Carrey actually. Hold on. I'm going to take that again. I'm so happy to actually see Jim Carrey able to throw a punch here in comparison to when he's the Riddler in Batman Forever, the scene with him and Two-Face, and he goes to clock that one. Yeah.
Sorry.
But no, I mean, so Jim Carrey actually has a little bit of oomph in him here. So, I mean, good on him for some good fight choreography. And it's sad to see Dorian go. But again, I want to bring up the point. Where does Dorian go? He has to go somewhere. Again, everything that the mask does actually happens in reality. It's not just a cute animation.
Maybe he goes to the sequel that never happened.
I hope so. I would love. It would be great to see a sequel that focuses on Dorian coming back to reality.
Well, he's dead, so.
So maybe he's a zombie ghost with a mask. So he's even more powerful now. You jackass.
Yeah, jackass. Outside, the police are taking Stanley away. Or actually, hold on. Outside, Stanley and Tina are exiting, and Calloway bumps in and is like, "Where are these guys going? Arrest them!" And then the mayor comes by and says, "No, that guy's a hero. He's not the mask. Dorian was the mask. I saw it with my own 2 eyes." Stanley says, "Well, it's nothing any American wouldn't do that had balls of steel." So not only does Stanley get away scot-free here, but the mayor then tells Calloway he wants him in his office first thing Monday morning. He's in some trouble. Next day, Tina and Charlie pull up to the bridge. Stanley and Tina get out with the mask. He says, "Are you sure you won't miss this guy? Because after it's gone, it's just me." She grabs it, throws it in the water. We see Charlie hop out of the car, get off the bridge, and he actually jumps off the bridge into the water. And right before he's going to get to the mask, old Milo swims down and beats him to it. And then the last shot of the movie here is Stanley kissing Tina, and he says, "Smoking." That's the end of the movie. Credits roll. What'd you think of the ending here?
I think that, story-wise, they definitely do wrap everything up. It's a classic good guy wins in all instances. Not only is Stanley Ipkiss absolved of all criminal dealings, he's, idolized by the mayor, because of course the mayor. He gets the girl. Everything in his life is absolutely good. And he sheds the mask and becomes the person underneath that he always was. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said for the subtext and the metaphors between the mask and the letter and the good guy and the blah, 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 blah. We get it. Good for Stanley Ipkiss.
So that's it, man. I have to say, it had been 20 years since I've watched it. I kind of expected to like the movie more than I did. I don't think I'm going to be watching this anytime again soon. Not that it was bad, but it's just, I don't know. To me, it hasn't aged all that well. What were your thoughts?
I think, part of the reason why it may not have aged so well is, one, it's based on a comic book property. And we are in the golden age, if you want to say, of comic book movies.
Good point.
And so everything that we know about the really corny characters and the bright yellow costumes from, drawn on a page to what we get to see in the cinemas now is so different than what happened in the 90s. And that goes with all other superhero movies, like any other ones that we would have reviewed at any point. And it's just, I think that coupled with Jim Carrey's performance, coupled with just the insanity of the story, it's just, I don't know. I'm with you. Like, I didn't have this kind of like pit in my stomach after watching Ace Ventura. I was much more like super enthused after watching that. And after watching The Mask, I'm just left with questions.
Pure hatred for our audience for not selecting Blank Man instead.
God, I really wish we could have done Blank Man.
So So we will be back with all new movies next week to review. We'll be dropping a solo Star Wars story to review on Monday. And then we're going to have our Dracula episode that'll drop later in the week. You can support the podcast by clicking the subscribe button on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Google Play, YouTube. And make sure you like, share, and retweet our post. Help us get the word out there. We've got no marketing budget here, so it's all word of mouth coming from you guys. Support our sponsor at bunny17media.com. Use promo code BACKINTIME at checkout. Save 15%. It is that time of the episode to get back in the DeLorean, punch in today's date, and return back to present day. We'll talk to you next week. See ya.
Speaking.
This means your future hasn't been written yet. No one's has. Your future is whatever you make it. So make it a good one. Both of you. We will, Doc. Stand back.